Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our mission today is pretty specific. We're synthesizing some really deep data-driven research on an iGaming market that has, frankly, puzzled a lot of analysts.
Haiti?
Exactly. On paper, it almost looks like the ultimate Wild West opportunity,
Yeah.
a huge regulatory void.
But the research we've done, the comprehensive reports from our team, paints a very, very different picture.
And for those who might be new to our work, maybe you should clarify who we are.
Right. So we are the Gambling Databases research team. We produce these in-depth analyses of the global iGaming landscape, and we cover everything from local regulations, taxation, player experience.
All the way to operator conditions and emerging trends.
The goal is always to give you a clear, data-driven understanding of how these complex markets actually function on the ground.
And usually when we dive into a new market, there's a pretty clear spectrum. Low risk, low reward, or, high risk, high reward.
Haiti just doesn't fit that model. It presents this rare case that's defined by a complete legal vacuum in the online space.
But coupled with what our internal analysis ended up labeling critical risk warnings.
The paradox is just striking. I mean, you have established legal land-based casinos, you have a booming, incredibly popular lottery.
And yet the online sector is completely unregulated. A ghost.
So that's our mission today. We need to dissect the source material and figure out if that wide-open legal gray area is a real opportunity for an international operator or if it's what the economics suggest.
A guaranteed financial sinkhole.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's start at the very beginning, the formal regulatory framework. If an operator did want to establish some kind of legal beachhead, who's actually in charge of gambling in Haiti?
Well, the official body is the Lottery of the Haitian State.
Uh-huh.
You'll see it referenced as either LISA or LEH.
Two acronyms for the same entity.
Yes, and that kind of hints at some of the institutional confusion that, plagues the whole government structure there. But crucially, their legal power is almost entirely focused on traditional physical gambling.
And even the rules they do enforce for land-based casinos seem almost designed to limit competition, even if the fees themselves look low.
Oh, they're highly restrictive, a massive barrier to entry. If you want a full casino license, the source material is very clear. Your establishment has to be a large hotel.
A large hotel with, what, a minimum number of rooms?
A minimum of 200 rooms. Just think about the capital and the infrastructure required to meet that one single rule.
So the annual license fee might be tiny, what is it, $1,000?
Just $1,000 USD, yes, almost nothing. But that initial investment in tourism infrastructure is immense.
And if you can't build a 200-room hotel, what are your options then?
Then you're sort of relegated to operating what they call a smaller gaming house. But even there, the limits are extreme.
How extreme?
A maximum of 7 table games, and critically, absolutely no slot machines are allowed.
Wow. So you're immediately starving the market of its highest revenue games.
That's the structure. It creates a very tightly controlled, high-barrier physical market.
But then you look at the online status, and all that tight control just vanishes. What's the official position on iGaming?
It's an unambiguous legal gray area. There is no formal legalization, no official licensing process, and zero regulatory oversight for any online operations.
Which means no domestic online operators exist at all.
None.
And see, this is where some operators, especially those looking for easy access, get excited. They see a market of almost 12 million people with no local competition, and they just think, loophole.
That is the classic dangerous first read. The reality is the market is already being served entirely by international offshore operators. Our research identified a few specific sites, Verticasino, MetaWin, Lugiano, and BetSwap, that are pretty active.
And they're all running on licenses from
Where?
Curacao, I'm guessing?
Usually Curacao, yes. So the player demand is clearly there, but the local legal system has just decided to completely ignore the whole sector.
Okay, hold on. Before we move on, let's talk about taxation. Because if Haiti ever did decide to regulate, the tax structure they have for land-based operations is so severe. Doesn't that pretty much guarantee failure for any future online market?
That is precisely the core warning in the research. The current tax burden, which you have to assume would be the baseline for any future iGaming market, is just punitive.
How punitive are we talking?
Casinos are hit with a crushing 40% tax on gross gaming revenue, GGR.
And for our listener, let's just quickly define that. GGR, gross gaming revenue. That's the money the house keeps after paying out all the winnings, right?
Exactly. It's the pot of money you use to pay for everything else. Marketing, salaries, operations, all of it. A 40% tax on that figure is It's astronomical by global standard.
I mean, you compare that to major European markets or even some U.S. states where online rates are, what, maybe 25% on the high end?
Rarely above that, no. And that 40% is just the beginning of the tax burden in Haiti.
There's more.
Oh, yes. On top of that, operators pay a flat 10% corporate income tax on their net profits. And then there's the player side.
Okay.
Players aren't taxed directly on their income, but the operators are legally required to withhold a separate 5% tax on any player winnings at the moment of payout.
So if you put it all together,
Mm-hmm.
the 40% GGR tax plus the 10% corporate tax, what's the effective rate our source material came up with?
The combined effective tax burden easily goes over 50%. The source explicitly states that the economics here make this market effectively unviable under this kind of structure.
That is a staggering disincentive. It tells you everything you need to know about what a future regulated market would look like.
Probably non-existent.
Right. So let's move from that hypothetical legal framework to the very concrete reality on the ground, the consumer and the infrastructure.
Okay. So we're looking at a population of about 11.8 million people. It's a very young country. The median age is just 24 and a half.
Which normally would signal huge potential for mobile iGaming. That's the dream demographic for an operator.
Yeah, it would be. But you have to immediately ground that demographic promise in the economic reality.
Which is the core financial constraint that defines this whole market.
Absolutely. The economic reality is stark. The GDP per capita is around $1,185 US dollars based on 2025 estimates.
Wow. $1,185 a year.
And our source material really pulls no punches on this. It warns that this figure translates to the target market having, and I'm quoting here, essentially zero disposable income for gambling.
I mean, when you're looking at an annual income that low, you have to assume every single cent is going to food, shelter, just survival. Assuming a recreational budget for betting exists as a massive failure in market assessment.
It just fundamentally changes the entire equation. You're not competing for cash flow, you're competing for crumbs. And then the infrastructure comes in to make it even worse.
Which the source labeled an infrastructure catastrophe.
Dramatically but accurately, yes. First, just basic connectivity. Internet penetration is only between 30 and 40%.
So right off the bat, 60 to 70% of your potential market is physically inaccessible.
They're just not online. It's a demographic wall imposed by physics, and even where you can get a connection.
Service is terrible.
Exactly. Average speeds are incredibly slow, maybe 10 to 12 millipees in a city, but it often drops below 5 millipees in rural areas.
That's basically dial-up speed by modern standards.
It is. And then you have to layer on top of that the frequent, unpredictable power outages that constantly disrupt everything. You can't run a live betting platform or even complex slots if the power and internet are constantly cutting out.
Okay, so the consumer base has very little money. The internet is slow and unreliable. How do transactions even happen? Banking must be an almost impossible hurdle.
It's a critical constraint, yeah. Banking penetration is notoriously low. And to add insult to injury, some of the traditional banks that do exist will actively restrict any gambling-related transactions.
Why? Just internal risk policies.
Exactly. So operators can't rely on the usual payment rails, no credit cards, no wire transfers.
So what are they forced to use instead? What's the workaround?
It forces a total shift to non-traditional methods. Mobile money is absolutely critical, most notably a service called Moncash.
I've heard of that. It's sort of the financial backbone for a huge part of the population.
It is. And we're also seeing a growing adoption of cryptocurrencies for transactions, at least among the more tech-savvy players.
For the very limited group of players who can connect and can pay, what are they actually playing? What does the demand look like?
The demand clearly reflects that mobile-first reality. So players on these offshore sites, they overwhelmingly prefer mobile-friendly slots and, no surprise, soccer betting.
And session times are short, I'd imagine.
Very modest, averaging only about 20 to 30 minutes. That's likely constrained by things like battery life and just unreliable connectivity.
And I'm guessing localization is non-negotiable.
Mandatory. Content has to be fully accessible in both Haitian Creole and French.
Okay, so an operator has to spend $250,000 to set up. They're facing consumers with no money, terrible infrastructure, and potentially crippling taxes. But there's also an incumbent competitor that is basically impossible to beat.
And that is the final decisive blow against the market's viability. The formal licensed market is completely, utterly overshadowed by the informal gambling market.
Let's talk about the size of that informal competitor.
It is staggering. The widespread, totally untaxed local lottery, it's known as Borlet, is the dominant form of gambling.
How dominant?
Our source material confirms it accounts for over 70% of the total gambling volume in the entire country.
70%.
Over 70. Roulette is hyper-localized, it operates on community trust, and crucially, it's entirely untaxed.
How can any licensed taxed operator staring down a potential 50% GGR tax possibly compete with that?
They can't. It's that simple. The economic math is completely broken by this informal competition, and that's before we even get to the governance environment itself.
The political instability.
It's extreme. Persistent political instability leads to a completely unpredictable regulatory environment. And on top of that, the source identifies this challenge of weak institutional capacity.
Which means compliance enforcement is limited, but there's a flip side to that, right? A much bigger risk.
A huge one. The country is flagged internationally as having deficient anti-money laundering or AML controls.
And for our listeners, could you just quickly explain why that's such a massive reputational risk for an international brand?
Well, AML refers to the rule designed to stop criminals from hiding illegally obtained funds. If Haiti's government can't monitor financial transactions effectively, any international operator there faces a huge risk of being used, even accidentally, for money laundering.
And that instantly gets the attention of global financial regulators, the EU, the U.S. Treasury.
It becomes a massive compliance and reputational disaster for the parent company.
So let's get to the reality check from the source material. The financial projections really just tell the whole story. What's the startup investment versus the actual market size?
The initial investment just to enter the market is estimated at a minimum of $250,000 USD. That's the baseline.
And the big chunk of that is just for lawyers, right?
A huge chunk. Between $40,000 and $80,000 is budgeted just for legal consulting, because figuring out that lack of regulation is itself a very expensive, specialized service.
So $250,000 up front just to enter a market that, as you said, has essentially zero disposable income.
And the potential reward for that investment is microscopic. Our research projects the entire formal market for casino equipment.
Like physical slot machines and tables.
Yes, the physical assets. That entire market is projected at a minuscule $54,850 USD for 2025.
Wait. You're spending over $250,000 to tap into a formal physical market worth less than a fifth of your setup costs.
The number says it all. It just proves the dominance of the informal sector. And even if an operator somehow survives all of that, the ROI timeline is just brutal.
How long are we talking?
The conservative estimate is 3 to 5 years just to break even, and that's if everything goes perfectly. Realistically, a positive ROI is probably 5 to 7 years away, minimum.
Which brings us to the final stark verdict from the Gambling Databases research team.
It's unambiguous. Haiti is rated one of the absolute least attractive iGaming markets globally. It gets an operator E-score of 3.2 out of 10.
3.2. Ouch.
So the bottom line, the directive from the source is clear. Avoid this market for 99% of operators. The only theoretical exception might be for someone using it as a strategic loss leader for broader regional expansion.
Which, given all the risks you just laid out, sounds like a highly questionable strategy itself.
It is. The economics are simply prohibitive.
So the surprising truth here is that the lack of online regulation in Haiti isn't a loophole at all. It's a trap. It's this deadly mix of legal uncertainty, infrastructure failure, and extreme poverty.
And this situation forces us to consider a final kind of provocative thought. If you have these international offshore operators serving a market with zero domestic regulation, what responsibility do they actually have when there are absolutely no mandated responsible gambling programs, no consumer protection measures, no recourse for players at all?
That legal void creates a moral vacuum. If the only choices are an untaxed informal lottery and a foreign operator with a Curacao license, what ethical safeguards are in place for a population that we've already identified as having zero disposable income?
Effectively, none. The data implies a scenario where the most vulnerable people are accessing platforms with zero mandated protections against addiction or financial ruin, all because the local legal system has just decided to look the other way.
That's a really harsh reality check. And this analysis, this data, comes directly from the Gambling Databases research team, dedicated to providing this full, unvarnished picture.
And for the full text of this report and all of our other detailed country analyses where we explore all of these topics from regulations to player experience, you can visit our website. It's gamblingdatabases.com.
Thank you for diving deep with us today. We'll see you next time.